I mix what I like, what I like.
I mix what I like is exactly where you want and need to be. I mix what I like, organic, vegan, soul food from your immediate diet. Live healthy.
I mix what I like, what I like.
We're here on I Mix What I Like. You may check us out on imixwhatilike.org, where you can see all these other shows and what my daddy likes and other cool things.
So, what's up, world? Welcome back to I Mix What I Like, right here on Black Liberation Media. Again, I'm Jared Ball. Welcome, everyone. Please do like, share, subscribe, support our Patreon. Tomorrow, we are off and out of the demonetized wilderness. But we still would prefer you support the Patreon as opposed to even BPM membership. But in either event, like, share, subscribe, comment. Welcome if you're here live. Peace, Leah, Alex, Troy, Relly Rel, Denise, Chitty Matcha, Syrup, Lisa, good to see you all. Peace, Alicia. Eric, I expect Dhoruba to join us any moment. But again, in the interim, please do all of the things. Oh, what's up, Josh? What's up? What's happening? What's happening? So the impetus of the discussion was that the short of it, I'll just do the intro part while we wait for Dhoruba, was that Dhoruba saw Gerald Horne in the discussion about his new book, Armed Struggle, subtitled Panthers and Communists, Black Nationalists and Liberals in Southern California through the 60s and 70s. And I'm always looking for an excuse to invite Dhoruba on, and particularly in the context of that discussion and that topic. And I did reach out to Dr. Horne, and and I just assume, or I'll just speculate at this point, that mistakes I've made have not been seen worthy of overcoming for a discussion, and I'll just have to leave it at that. So, I'll just leave it at that. That's fine. And but nonetheless, we have, more importantly, the work that we can discuss, and I'm always happy to do that. I've not finished the book. It's 600 pages. So that wasn't the promise. There were a few things that I was able to glean so far that I would want to bring to Dhoruba's attention, or to start a conversation with him about. It's what I will say. Let me just double check that I'm not missing a message. But what I will say from the top, just out the gate, having read, as I often do, I start with the intro and then the epilogue, and then I work my way through, unless I'm going to perform some sort of review, at which point I would read it differently, but I'm not doing that. I'm just but just out the gate, what I really appreciate about the book is that, I mean, just what he says right out at the beginning here, just the way, there's two things that I'm clear that I really like about what he's done here, that I think that I can appreciate. That I could appreciate a scholar doing, and that I could appreciate someone doing to try to get you to be more focused on the argument than what the author themselves thinks. If that makes sense. And I don't know if I'm being fair here, but what I like, okay, so the first thing, and more importantly, what I really like is that on the second page, he says, Horne writes, nonetheless, Black comrades in particular were deadly serious about this initiative, and the initiative that he meant was armed struggle. And my point here is that maybe my only meaningful pet peeve as a wannabe scholar, activist, et cetera, and so forth, or just an intellectual or thinking person who cares about this stuff, is that I don't like when people talk about ideas that are revolutionary, radical, or just selfishly important to me, when they have a clear disrespect for those ideas. It's not a matter of having to agree or disagree. It's that, do you just appropriately respect the concept, worthy, and engage it honestly and meaningfully? So, and when it comes to this topic, armed struggle, I just love that Horn has already made it clear that the way I'm interpreting it, whatever any of us think about it, or however comfortable we are with the concept of talking publicly about it, we want to acknowledge that the people we're talking about were themselves serious. They were not to be taken lightly. They shouldn't be dismissed as engaging in, sometimes, people get dismissed as romantic or adventurous or whatever. So I appreciate that. The other thing, and I just noticed this trying to just read as much as possible before we got started, I really like, and I don't know to what extent I could say it's prevalent because I haven't read enough of the book yet, but I'm gonna share with you the other thing that I really like so far from the book. So a lot of the book, and if any of you have read any, and as I'm sure many of you have read more than I have, of Horn's work or work similar to it in terms of quality, there's a lot of research packed in to every almost sentence, but certainly every page and paragraph. So, and a lot of what he's covering are and I don't know, again, I haven't read enough to know if this is the to call it his approach, but it feels like so far part of his approach is to talk about armed struggle by showing us the arguments that occurred within the Panther Party, the Black Left, and the Communist Party. And I'll come back to this point, but a lot of it is a comparison, as it said as a subtitle. It's a look at the relationship of the Panthers to the Communists and how each dealt with this issue of armed struggle. I think I have that part right. So what you get is a lot of detail and a lot of information about who said what about what and when and what were their differences of opinion. It's fascinating. So in this discussion, part of it is a discussion of when the Communist Party, and I see Dhoruba logging in, so I'll wrap here, but there's a section where the Communist Party, where George Jackson, because of course I skipped to the parts where he's talking about George, where George Jackson is talking about, in a letter writing back and forth with Herbert Aptheker, the famous white communist scholar, and they're having and George is saying, Herbert, I don't like the way the Communist Party came out and attacked my brother Jonathan for his actions in Marin County. And he appreciated that Angela, though she didn't break with the Communist Party for another 2 decades, did defend Jonathan against her Communist Party comrades. But my point about what Gerald Horne is doing here is to say that in this discussion, Horne writes, citing this discussion between Herbert Aptheker and George Jackson, referencing this, Horne writes, Jackson argued, quote, I don't know why people who love each other and hate hierarchy also find so much to debate over. It's stimulating to a point, then it tends to retard action. Comma, end quote, likely accurate, Horne concludes the sentence. So my point is that I think, I don't know that I've read enough to see a pattern here yet, but I like that. I don't know, maybe I'm doing too much with this, but I actually like what I think he's doing there and the way he's doing it, that is Horn. In the context of showing us this discussion, he just throws it in there, likely accurate. And then he goes on to continue. He doesn't elaborate, at least here, about his own personal thoughts. But it's a good, I hope you see my point there. It's he just adds that likely accurate to refer back to Jackson saying, I like arguments to a point, but then it starts to retard action. So I like that. Let's see, Dhoruba, I don't know if you're ready to, are you struggling with the camera? I don't know what's, okay, here we go. So you know what it is. We have back with us.
Struggling with Negroes.
Oh, what happened?
I'm struggling with Negroes. I ain't struggling with the camera.
Oh. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. Well, but we're good. Welcome back to the platform, to the show. It's good to see you again. I hope all is at least relatively well. How you doing, man? Aside from that.
Likely accurate, huh?
I like how he did that. I'm glad you heard that part. I like how he did that. I don't know. I don't know if you wanted to comment further, if you want to go back, if you want me to reset anything.
No. We should start from the beginning. First of all, I as usual, I'm glad to be here. I thank you for allowing us the opportunity to kick the Willy Bobo around this. But I think, like Homeboy said, too much sap rap, too much intellectual masturbation and pontification leads to no action.
Before we ask you to elaborate, can I show you something real quick that I saw somewhere else before we get back to this? Mm-hmm. Shout out to Mumia, who just had a 70th birthday. And I don't know if you or anyone else caught this, but I thought I would play this little clip. He was on with Mark Lamont Hill. They have a regular The Classroom in the Cell podcast where Mumia can call in and they have these short conversations. And they did this on celebration of Mumia's 70th. And I just wanted to play this little part for you since I knew you were going to be joining us today.
The life of resistance to the white nation and to imperialism, and the fact that they're at their ages. I heard the brother Dhoruba Bin-Wahad, formerly of the New York Panther 21, I was talking about, Mumia, he's one of our young bucks. I'm a young buck because I'm only 70. Come on.
You're only 70, right? The right young age is 70.
Yeah. So that was it. They have a nice conversation. I encourage people to check that out if they haven't. I just thought that was a funny nice little shout out to you. And I thought even before we got to the horn that we book or discussion and that we could start with that for a second. If you could just reflect on maybe if you remember what the moment that Mumia was talking about there, or maybe just in general your interactions with him over the years, again in light of his 70th birthday just passing, and that sort of memory he was sharing there.
Well, Mumia, shout out to Mumia Abu Jamal. He's as we all know, we all know this. Mumia is a brilliant journalist. He's a brilliant commentator. He's a steadfast comrade, and of course we know that the entire law enforcement establishment, especially in Philadelphia, was intent on murdering him because of these qualities, because of his steadfast commitment to the truth, to the African community in Philadelphia, and his advocacy for MOVE. So I just want to shout out to Mumia on the 70th anniversary. Having said that, I am 10 years older than him, so he is a young buck. And when he was in the Black Panther Party, he was in the Ministry of Information, And he was energetic, as most young folks are, enthusiastic as he was. But the Philadelphia branch of the party underwent some serious repression, underwent some serious attacks by the racist dog of Frank Rizzo. I believe Frank Rizzo. His first name was Frank, but anyway, he was a piece of doggo. He was dog-awful, and he was a very virulent a fascist and racist. And he challenged the Black Panther Party at a particular juncture when the Black Panther Party was calling for a constitutional convention. And we held it in Philadelphia. And the purpose of that constitutional convention was to bring together the left and progressive people to call for or to advocate in their particular jurisdictions, in their particular areas, in their particular communities, for removing the part of the Constitution that permitted the oligarchy to maintain power regardless of the popular vote, regardless of the mass vote, which of course we now know as the electoral college system. And so we were talking about a constitutional convention. And by the way, we were supposed to have it down in, I think, that college, Black College in Washington, D.C., Howard. I think it was Howard. I could be mistaken. It could have been another HBCU. But we intended to have the plenary session for that convocation in Philadelphia, there at HBCU. And of course, the FBI contacted the administration there, and they wouldn't allow us to have it on the campus. So we had to go to a church. I believe it was a church in DC and do this plenary session. But like I said, there's a history to everything, and one of the problems with this history is what I call stealth history, the rewriting of this history, and the reorganization of the players in this history in order to sideline certain people who had a correct view at that particular time, and boost up the credibility of those who didn't. And I haven't had the opportunity to read Gerald Horne's book. I've expressed to you, as I've expressed to many people, I have an enormous amount of respect for this man and his work. And I'm just amazed at the prolificity of his writings and his research. It's amazing, and so shout out to Gerald Horne. I would have hoped to be able to have a dialogue with him about this, because he has a lot of information that I know I don't have and that I haven't had access to. And I think similarly, I have access to information and practice and politics and in the party and out the party, and in terms of the BLA and the East Coast, that I don't think he has any insight. He hasn't had much research in. But you could never underestimate Gerald Horne. Now he might have buku information to come out with another book while we speak. So I'm not at all saying that he's limited in his scope or his breadth or his historical analysis. I'm just saying that I haven't read the book, and I haven't been privy to many of the dialogues that he had researched and come up with between the Communist Party and APDECA. I was on the ground. I was a field secretary. So when it comes to people like Angela, of which we have a common result of talking about a girlfriend on the media. However, let me say this: that when Angela, just to throw this out there, I don't know if it's in the book, that when Angela went so-called went underground or disappeared, there was a handover that was supposed to take place. between her security and the Communist Party's security that was supposed to be shepherding her, you know, underground, because the Communist Party did have resources and stuff in the United States that were, I guess we could call it clandestine, but given how thoroughly infiltrated the Communist Party USA was, I don't know how clandestine it could have possibly been. But anyway, she was supposed to be transferred to our our control and security, and that was at that precise moment that she was arrested. And during that transaction, during that transfer. Now I don't know how willing the sister is to talk about that, but I know from my perspective, I know what my instructions were from the Central Committee. I know what my instructions were in New York as the field secretary in there, and oh, that's somebody else's phone. And so I, that didn't go right. It never happened, and she was arrested, and she was arrested with I believe she was arrested with Poindexter, wasn't she?
That part I don't remember, and I haven't gotten to any part where Horn is discussing that part. So I
know. I'm just saying. I'm just saying that because one of the key things that I saw the interview on the Activist Network of Gerald Horn.
Now he would be able to put you in touch with Horn if you, and I know you've been on that platform too. You in terms of
I talked to the brother. The brother I'm in touch with wasn't the one that actually did the interview. He's in the Activist Network though. And that, in fact, that's how I found out about the interview, because I hadn't read the book yet.
Yeah, Laurie and Poindexter. Yeah.
Yeah,
right?
I figured that. I'm getting senile, but I got kind of like a little memory. Yeah, he got arrested with her.
Or David Poindexter.
Well, I don't know what his first name was. I just knew Poindexter.
Okay.
And so that didn't go well. That transfer. Years later, a similar thing happened with Asada, and that went perfect. But we had more leverage in that move than the Communist Party.
So
anyway, my point is, but the point I was trying to, the brief point, I'm gonna let you go. The brief point I was trying to make is that when I saw the interview with Gerald Horn, and I see how he focused on Southern California, and he's and in fact I think he specified Southern California in the title, and he talked about the reactionary cultural nationalists and the Black Panther Party leadership in Southern California. I believe he was either a graduate student or a student at that time himself. And so he interacted with these folks on a first-hand basis. Now, how much security clearance he had with members in the Central Committee, I don't know, but I do know what instructions I've had and who we dealt with. The major person that I dealt with on the East Coast regarding the Communist Party was Charlene Mitchell, who was like Angela's, a mother hen, so to speak. And I know from my files alone how the Communist Party focused on Charlene Mitchell in order to neutralize her and define her as anti-Semitic, primarily because she was working with the Black Panther Party in New York on the 21 Defense Committee. She was working with the party around political prisoners, and she was repping the Communist Party while she was doing this. So there was a campaign called Dear Irving. It was a letter writing campaign. That was just the tip of the iceberg. And FBI would send letters to influential Jewish supporters of the Communist Party in and out of its ranks, and basically try to neutralize any relationship that the CPUSA had with Black radical organizations and any support that they would give. And this, of course, we have to assume this resonated with the CIA too in their relationships abroad with the left. Because if you recall, and I'm jumping ahead right now, if you recall when Angela was arrested and the Communist Party decided to defend her and get an attorney for her, she became the darling of the Communist parties throughout Europe. And at that time, Europe was under the auspices or geopolitical control of the Soviet Union, the USSR. And so everywhere you went, Angela was the face of Black resistance or Black power in the United States, in Paris, in London, in all throughout the West with the Communist parties. And we'll get back to that again when we talk about how the left in Europe and how the left in the United States viewed armed struggle, especially by oppressed people and colonized people. And our proposition of a domestic colony, which you wrote about, and I think you discussed the other day, our analysis and our synthesis of colonialism, domestic colonialism, the white supremacist construct in America being an internal colony as it relates to Black people. The Communist Party had a serious problem with that. They were towing. They were towing.
Go ahead.
They were towing the line of Moscow. And we see what that brought about when the Communist Party collapsed in the United States. All of the Black membership of the Communist Party then became organizations of correspondence. You see, they no longer had the type of legs that the party had developed before World War II, during World War II, and after World War II. So I'm going to end with this. A really serious historical fact. The major resistance in Europe against the Nazi occupation of Europe was the socialists and communists. They were the freedom fighters. They were the partisans. They were the ones that fought the Nazi occupation, and they paid for it in blood and flesh. I just want to point that out. And that same left, after the communists, after the defeat of the Nazis, in Europe and all through the beginning of the Cold War, supported armed struggle in Africa. They supported the armed struggles in Africa until it came to Algeria and the French. And that was a big problem for the French left. You see, the armed struggle in Nigeria, in Liberia. And just as that was a big problem, just as that was a big problem for the French left, social democrats and democratic socialists and communists, the idea or the notion that we had a right to armed struggle, that we had a right to resist, that we had a right to organize ourselves in formations to defend our communities, to exact the political consequence on the enemy, was a problem for the U.S. Communist Party. For the U.S. Communist Party, and that was partially a result of how effective COINTELPRO was in turning Jewish members and Jewish support in the Communist Party against the idea and the notions of Black power and Black liberation. So I just want to end with that.
Well, Horn on one page, on the second page, agrees with at least two of the points that you are making here. On the one hand, he acknowledges it is and says that oppressed peoples globally had arrived at a similar conclusion, that is, an agreement that armed struggle is the only way, in quoting Huey Newton. And then he also makes the point that is Horn that the problem in the U.S. was an assessment of the correlation of forces domestically and globally in light of the perniciousness of class collaboration that inhered in settler colonialism at home, a point that even the wisest rarely engaged. So he acknowledged, he points out the flaw in a lot of people's analyses about around settler colonialism. The other point specific to your other point about where he puts his focus, yes, he puts his focus in California, in Southern California in particular. But Horn also writes in explanation and I read this with some humorous braggadocio or whatever, that Horn writes, it was left to George Jackson to pose the query that the foregoing helps to answer. Quote, why do California joints, that is prisons, produce more Bunchy Carters and Eldridge Cleavers than those over the rest of the country, end quote. That is, what is the specific socio-political situation in California that produces so much rebelliousness, and particularly an affinity for armed struggle? So that at least situates part of what Horn is focused on here. And then there were a couple of things though that as I was saying earlier, in his exploration of the various, I guess, debates within the Panther Party and the Communist Party and the overlap, politically at least, around armed struggle, is that there are a number of things that I thought that you, having at least seen the interview, you know, and me reading at least some of the book so far, we could make, you know, some use of in terms of conversation, because you do come up a couple of times here in the book, though the book is focused mostly, and there's an issue that comes up related to you that I definitely want to ask you about at some point, but I'll start here with he unfortunately, so like, the first thing I wanted to say was, in reading this, it reminds me a little bit of when I was thinking of when Jeffrey Perry was writing about Hubert Henry Harrison and all of the debates in the early 20th century among Black leaders. If you all had YouTube, if your generation had access to YouTube, you all would have been just as bad with it as much of this current generation is in terms of beef. You
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't have no problem saying that. In fact, you remember the draft of Beggars on Horseback I sent you?
Yeah.
And I said I had to rewrite it because of technology.
Yeah.
I said I wanted to rewrite it. I don't have no problem. I mean, look at the look at the plethora of internet militants and revolutionaries and pundits that abound right now, you know, and listen to some of the stuff that they're talking about.
But Horn is citing, like, I'm not going to interrupt too long, but just say Horn is citing like Panther paper, essays, letters written, radio interviews. You all were, I mean, you all were, again, as Manny is saying, you all were as messy as everybody. So I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I think the exception people have to understand is the difference between face-to-face organization in the community around issues and struggles, and being a revolutionary vanguard party that believes that the people should lead, that believe we should take the issues that the people have and express those issues in ways that will empower and enlighten them, and try to organize them around that enlightenment. You know, I've always was critical of, for instance, the breakfast program. And I wasn't critical of the breakfast program because it was the breakfast program. I was critical of the breakfast program because the way it was being organized with the masses of people, we became basically a radical welfare organization. We were viewed as a substitute for the government. And so when the government then took the idea of the breakfast program and initiated free lunch programs, you know, everybody forgot about the Black Panther Party and how it originated. Same thing with the free health clinics. You see, same thing with the liberation schools. So my criticism wasn't that we shouldn't feed the people, you know, that we shouldn't. That was to give the people an example of how we could take what we have in order to satisfy or deal with what we need, our needs. That we didn't have to rely on the government. It was a socialist principle. It was the principle of trying to inject socialist thinking amongst a poor people in a capitalist consumer society, and of which they were locked into, you see. But of course, it was taken out of out of context. And now when you listen to the history of the Black Panther Party, all you really hear from these new age young students and activists is, oh, the Panthers used to feed people. They just didn't have guns. Oh, the Panthers used to have free health clinics. They used to take mamas and stuff to prisons and all of that. They forget the part that the Black Panther Party had point number 7. We want to end to police brutality and the occupation of our community by a foreign army. And you're not going to get that end without organizing against that entity, the police state. And at that time, and people ask me, well, you know, the Black Panther Party had this significant impact in only 4 or 5 years of its existence, et cetera, et cetera. And they asked me how, why, when other organizations came and went, and some organizations still existed back then. So we need to ask ourselves, why were they permitted to exist and the Black Panther Party was destroyed? And the reason why is because the Black Panther Party was a revolutionary cadre organization that had a class analysis. And that's where I agree with Gerald Horne, 10 toes down. Okay, that was the significant difference between us and pork chop nationalists like Mama Lama Ram Karanga. I know I'm pronouncing his name wrong, but that's intentional. So that's the difference between us. And as I pointed out to many individuals, having known Amiri Baraka and in the latter part of his life, and shout out to Amiri and the contributions that he made. He was one of the most brilliant essayists and writers of our time. The same way with Jimmy Baldwin. You know, I mean, I was blessed to live in the same period of history when these men were out there. You know, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that everything that they did was accurate at that time. I mean, none of us are flawless, you know, myself included. So I just wanted to point that out because one of the things that Mary admitted, I had the honor to talk at one of his, right before he died, at one of the, you know, commemorations for him, you know, shout outs to him, memorials to him. And I, you know how I am. I kind of like made a joke out of it, but I said, you know, I guess just proves that to the House of Quiet, that black faces in high places after Gibson don't mean black political power. You know, and I'm so glad that my brother Amiri came around to understanding that there is a class, there are class distinctions in our community that the enemy will rely on, that the enemy will use against us. I think we see that in spades right now today. We have more political power, more political black people in office, in political office, than we've ever had in our history. And we have absolutely no political power. We have absolutely no. The only thing that we get used for is by the liberal, neoliberal segment of the duopoly, the Democratic Party. They just count us as, you know, niggas is just always there. You know, we could rely on these niggas, you know. So we get up to the Obamas and we get the Kamala Harrises and we get the Meeks and we get the Leonard Jeffries and we get all these bootlickers, like we get Auntie, what's her name? Waters, Auntie Waters. She needs to sit her ass down. You know, this is who we get. This is who we have. You know, and then true revolutionary voices that have been murdered, that have been exiled, that have been imprisoned, their history, that radical history, is then revised in order to justify this comprador class that we have now. And people don't really fully appreciate that the comprador class that we have today grew out of the success of the Black liberation movement and especially the success of the reformist anti-segregation movement, the symbolic reforms that went down after the Voting Rights Act. I mean, when black folks was burning down cities every summer and they were anticipating long, hot summers, they didn't say that they were anticipating these long, hot summers because black folks, you know, needed some revolutionary change or something more than symbolic victories. No, they said that this could lead to a serious revolutionary movement. This could lead to the organization of an independent black political power a party and power paradigm, and we have to co-opt it. And LBJ started the war on poverty. He said black folks are burning down their communities, these cities, because they don't have no investment in it, because they don't have any stake in it. So here comes our black capitalists. Here they come. LBJ, the war on poverty. You understand? And out of these what we call poverty pimps, evolved the present comprador class. That's their roots. The war on poverty. That's their roots. The attempt to co-opt, to derail black militancy and the idea of black self-determination. And the idea of black self-determination, of course, goes with the analysis of a domestic colony. And it goes with the understanding that our introduction into the United States was an act of war, and that we were introduced into a white supremacist colonial settler state. It evolved out of that historical continuum. So, like Amilcar Cabral pointed out, when he analyzed the revolutionary significance of the anti-colonial struggle, he said that the anti-colonial struggle was a reclaiming of the African historical continuum that had been interrupted by colonization. We became a footnote in European history, and we lost our history. You see, so reclaiming it meant one settler, one bullet. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm an advocate of violence or anything, but that's ultimately what it all comes down to. And in the United States, and in the so-called democracy, what I call the democratic fascist arrangement of the United States, that idea of one settler, one bullet translates into a democratic distribution of the pain. Without a democratic distribution of the pain, black power, black equality, the equality of marginalized people, of migrants, of people of color, of poor people is not possible. The only thing that you're left with is the reform, the symbolic reformism of the ruling class, which is the Democratic and Republican Party, which means that when we achieved the Voting Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act in 1964, it was not a significant strategic victory. It was a symbolic victory. And that's why we have to revisit almost every electoral cycle the right of black folks to vote, the ability for us to vote. Why do we have to revisit something that we supposedly won? So I just leave that there for the intellectuals and the academics to kick the Willy Bobo over. Me, I'm more intense on organizing black folks so that we could stop the murders that are going on right in our face by these armed agents of the state, by these bullies and reprobates in blue costumes.
And it's it's increasing year by year. We were just looking at that with Renee. And
shout out to Renee and that analysis that she did of Cop City, and how this is not just an individual or a regional thing that's happening in Georgia. This is national, and we'll talk about that later. But I didn't want to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, that's good. No, I mean, it's not an interruption. It's what I just wanted to make sure I found, and that's what I was flipping for. Is that so? The point I was getting at initially is that your name comes up a couple of times, and that unfortunately, from my vantage point, it's only because someone has said something critical of you, and at one point it's George Jackson in the Black Panther paper, and that's sort of what I was talking about with the YouTube channel. And I'll admit again, because of my bias, sometimes that you all weren't always on the same.
Well, let me run this past you, and I might as well use this as an opportunity to say this, because I might, my book, and shout out to Ori, who's supposed to be helping me with my book. My book is far from being written and at least getting a draft. I just have a little bit of it. But the reason why George Jackson said, and I don't know exactly what is quoted in the book, but I could imagine
Well,
Because when the split in
can
the
I
Black
just read it
Panther-
real quick?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Can I just read it real? What he says? It's a and of course now I lost the page, but he said, and it's in the Black Panther paper. He said that, and he's talking really. It's in that context of that back and forth with Aptheker about the Communist Party. And the short of it is, and I'll find it in a second, but the short of it is, he said that the right wing element of the Communist Party is no more representative of Angela Davis than Dhoruba is of Huey Newton.
Oh, he was right about that. Oh, shout out to George. May Allah be pleased with him. You're damn sure right about that. Because the reason why, ask yourself, why was it in the Black Panther Party newspaper if the Black Panther Party had split? It's only in the Black Panther Party newspaper because the Black Panther Party wanted to verify their move to the right with George Jackson and the BGF, who were locked in prison and didn't know what really happened. They didn't know that Huey was taking the BGF cadres coming out that wanted to join the struggle and had them running security for their yayo operations out of the lampposts and they pimping operations out of a nightclub. They didn't know that Huey and them had plans to move to the right and lock down the electoral politics of the Bay Area and Oakland, and that we stood against that. Okay, but when George did find that out, notice the change in the tone in George when he writes later on, right before he dies. Okay, right before he's murdered, rather, let me say, right before he's murdered. And so, yeah, he's absolutely right. The Black Panther. I definitely wasn't on the same page with my illustrious leader, as they moved to the right and as he became a tool of the enemy. And I just want to say now that gives me the entree to talk about Hilliard. And you remember the recent brouhaha with Hilliard endorsing Trump, saying that Trump had
But we even with you here, we clarified with the follow-up that he was being misled, that he wasn't really clear on what he was actually saying. So plus
he's half-assed senile.
Yeah.
So they took advantage of him. You understand? But no matter how senile I get, you ain't gonna never have me come out and endorse a complete enemy of my people. I might be crazy, I might have a bad memory, but it ain't that bad. You see? So I ain't gonna give him a pass for senility because he's my age too. That's like me saying that me and Genocide Joe we share. Yeah. We share.
But you function higher than most people half your age. You can't say that everybody ages the same now. Come on, man.
I ain't gonna get into no ageism, man. I'm just gonna say black don't crack, and that's all I got to say. Black don't crack. Right. I'm too bold to get old. But what I'm trying to say here is, little did we know, and I didn't really fully appreciate that to maybe 10 years ago, and I've been silent all of this time, and when we talked about David, we gave him a pass and said that, he was manipulated and he was in this place there, and he talked complete nonsense about New York. He didn't have no knowledge of what actually happened in New York, and David was the one that gave us the marching orders, is that Huey wanted, after all of this repression, after all of this, Huey wanted to relocate to New York because he felt that Harlem was the black capital of colonized Black America, and he wanted to do that. And so the party, using the Panther 21 defense funds, by the way, purchased a brownstone in Harlem. And I was charged, along with Setawayo Tabor, may Allah be pleased with him, who died in exile in Tanzania, and some other comrades, to renovate this building, because the building was just a shell, and it took extensive renovation. And so we began the process of trying to renovate it. Of course, we never completed it because the way the split happened in the party, it interrupted all of that stuff, right? But I think that maybe in the back of his mind, David was thinking about this purchase in New York and thought that Trump being, you know, a real estate agent and well known in New York, that somehow or other he might, I don't know what he was thinking, but I do know that that's what happened. I do know that money was allocated. I do know that the brownstone existed, and I was in it, and I was directed to renovate it. And paper money being sold from the paper went to the brothers that had to occupy and sisters that had to occupy that building. We had a permanent occupation in that building of about 5 or 6 brothers and sisters, you know, and that was Huey's. At least that was what was transmitted to me. Huey wanted to have his location. He wanted to get off of the West Coast, and I don't know what might have been behind that. I don't know all of these things. Some of these things Gerald might have hit upon in his writings. I can't speak on that, but I do know what happened in New York, and I do know.
No, go. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
So what I'm saying. But David. I found out, you know, I have 300,000 pages of FBI files at Princeton University, and I will be doing a presentation on these files in Princeton in October when I come back for my medical my medical checkup in late October, inshallah. But
well, we can continue. We can continue. There's definitely going to be more questions I'm going to have in general and for you. So this book is already given. There's many more conversations we can have after today relevant to this book, and as others get the chance to read it, to because he's got a specific chapter. For instance, in here he's got a chapter on the Afro-American Liberation Army.
Before you go on,
yeah, go ahead. No,
that was part of the split there. Because it was always an underground to the Black Panther Party. There were Black Panther members who organized themselves militarily, who came out of the military, who never showed up in the offices or at demonstrations. You might see 1 or 2 of them at major demonstrations, and they would be the security. And they really related to the former Field Marshal of the Black Panther Party, may Allah be pleased with him, Donald Cox, D.C. And this was on the West Coast, and in certain respects, that task was assigned to myself and Setaweo Tabor on the East Coast. Okay, and so that's where I'm coming from when I say that that what was happening on the West Coast with the leadership of the Black Panther Party and the Central Committee was really, really key to a lot of events that we look back in history and think that it happened only because of A, B, C, or D. It's like the assassination of Fred Hampton. People will say from the movies, from the popular understanding of Fred, he was a dynamic, charismatic Black young man in Chicago. The enemy tried to instigate gangs, to gang violence against the Black Panther Party. He neutralized that, you know, and in fact, he enlisted some of the gangs to support the party, you know, and so people will say, well, Fred was killed because he would have been the next Malcolm X, or he would have been this, that, and the other. Now, that's no taking away from Fred's charisma and his positions and his staunch revolutionary character. He died a revolutionary, and he said he would always be a revolutionary. And my comrade was that. You know, but the major reason that the FBI was intent on this is because of the democratization of the Central Committee. Fred Hampton was scheduled, among others, to be on the National Central Committee, and it was other brothers and sisters across the country that were also supposed to be on this. There was a struggle within the party that the Central Committee was too focused and dominated by California and West Coast activists in the party and West Coast leadership, and that they didn't really have a full grasp of the differences and the nuances of the different chapters around the country. And this was true. And finally, when they began to succumb to this understanding, They wanted to establish a process by which Central Committee members can be vetted and brought onto the Central Committee from other parts of the country. And that's when they started the so-called first cadre of the Central Committee, the first cadre of the Black Panther Party. And they started bringing us to California for political education, to work in certain programs, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, Fred Hampton, being that what we all said about him, he was that guy. You see, he was supposed to be, he was targeted to be on that Central Committee. You know, I myself was also was going to be selected for that. Okay, but they got rid of Fred. They killed him. They put in jail. You see, and so we need to understand that Fred wasn't just murdered because of his charisma and his activities in Chicago. He was murdered because of the potential he would have had if he was on the Central Committee of the National Black Panther Party, and what that charisma and that analysis would have done. It would have changed the whole balance of political sentiments, the political tendencies in the Central Committee, and they wouldn't have moved to the right. That split would have never have happened, because we'd have been able to exercise the principles of democratic centralism, criticism and self-criticism. We'd have been able to talk it out. You see, we would have been able to change this COINTELPRO action. But because he was assassinated and other leaders in the party and other chapters were neutralized and murdered down in Louisiana, in New York, in Boston, wherever, you know, that never happened. And the party moved to the right. And it moved to the right under this woman, Elaine Brown, who was suspect from the beginning. It moved to the right after Huey had to go into exile. You know, you talked about that in The Big Cigar, you know, and all of that stuff.
Snyder characters mentioned, Horn mentions that film producer passingly in the book too. That's kind of interesting.
No, but what I'm saying, I don't know. I don't know if you could see the connections that I'm talking about.
Oh no, I get it. No, I think it's very clear, and I think it's very important, and something that is often never brought up. This point about the Democratic Central Committee and where you all could have taken the party.
And then when I realized, you know, like I said, I got 300,000 pages of FBI files, and I had several volumes of wiretaps on the Central Committee. And you got to remember, I made a request during my counterintelligence, my COINTELPRO suit. I made a request to the West Coast, to Huey's family, to Lane, all of them, that they could sign on to this, that because the government was using the pretext that they couldn't release certain files on the Black Panther Party because they named certain individuals on the West Coast, and they had to have their clearance and their permission. Of course, none of them Negroes on the West Coast gave that permission. Okay, but I did get the unredacted, well, it was redacted, but the continual a peek into the wiretaps of the national headquarters, because what folks maybe don't understand about the FBI and the government, when they begin an investigation in a certain venue, all ancillary investigations that come from that initial investigation are given a number, are given a file, and therefore CCs and LSERS, electronic surveillance, goes to all of these different venues. You see what I'm saying? That's how I got my papers. I got my initial COINTELPRO document with my name on it from the Fred Hampton lawsuit in Chicago. That's where I got it from. The same way the brother, what's his name, Herman Ferguson, the reason he found out that the FBI had instigated this conspiracy against him was because I got papers about Herman Ferguson in my files, and I gave it to his people. And he used that to come back and negotiate just a year in prison, of which he only did a few months. You see what I'm saying? So what happened on that level also happened with David Hilliard. Because when I was going over these volumes that I had happened to have in the house down here in Georgia at the time, I was just reading them because I wanted to get them out of the house and put them, in storage. And I noticed that David Hilliard, who was the chief of staff of the Black Panther Party, and who I used to report to every week on a regular basis and have telephonic communications with all the time, that every time that David Hilliard was called to the telephone in national headquarters, the wiretap was suspended. It was suspended. And then it was reinitiated because back then the wiretap was on a tape. It was on a series, literally on a recording tape. And there was an agent sitting there monitoring the tape 24/7. And they had a memo, and it says per headquarters memo. Okay, this tape is discontinued, right? And then soon as David Hilliard got off the phone, the wiretap was reinitiated. So I asked my lawyers, I said, well, why would they do that? And they said, well, we could speculate. We don't have no real proof other than this, that we know how they behave, that if those wiretaps were summoned to court, in a court, as illegal surveillance, just say, let's say Geronimo Pratt, which, by the way, his surveillance in COINTELPRO is what got him out of prison when they said that he committed this murder hundreds and hundreds of miles away when he was at a Central Committee meeting. You see? So we know that those wiretaps, some of those wiretaps were tampered with and withheld because they didn't want their informant or the understanding that the wiretap actually existed there in a particular location. They didn't want that to come up in a subsequent discovery in a lawsuit against the FBI for illegal surveillance. So I said, well, I said, you said all that to say what? And they said, well, probably the person that they suspended the call for was probably an FBI asset. Not necessarily a snitch, not necessarily an agent, but an asset, and which would mean, you had a lot of Black folks back in the day that were assets, that were what they call community informers, community assets. They had plenty of these pork chop preachers just running around today that are still alive. They were FBI assets. The ones that wouldn't hold the breakfast program. The FBI would go to a church and try to stop the pastor from allowing us to set up a breakfast program. You see, they would go to the landlords of the parents of a Panther member and intimidate the landlord so that he would evict the parents unless their child ceased to relate to the Black Panther Party. Mm-hmm. So it became apparent to me, of course, as they moved to the right and as David Hilliard's behavior and animosity towards the underground increased, it became apparent to me that he was probably an asset to the FBI. And that brings us back to what we were talking about Horns talking about there were people, the Afro-American Liberation Army. Mm-hmm. That was the name that the Black Panther Party had assigned to the clandestine underground, was the Afro-American Liberation Army. Okay, and so when the division of the party went down, and several of the chapters are related more to continuing the legacy of armed resistance and armed self-defense in the Black community, using that appellation, Afro-American, what we felt was incorrect, because we felt that we were at war, that we were always at war, that our presence in America was an act of war, and that politics is the continuation of war by nonviolent means, and war is the continuation of politics by violent means. And all of this time that we're winning symbolic victories in the courts for civil rights, to recognize our human rights, was an act of war. It was the political manifestations of war. the nonviolent manifestations of war. So when the police murdered us and intimidated us and occupied our community like a foreign army and a gang, that was the armed agents of the state. That was the violent aspect of war. Same when they used to keep us on the plantation. And that's why, if you remember, I sent you that documentary on how the Black Panther Party used armed self-defense, how it was a tool of organizing and empowering our community, and how the National Rifle Association, the state of California viewed that. And people need to understand that one of the reasons why militancy took a more outwardly armed persona in California than any place else is because of the history of Black people's migration to California from the South. I mean, go into this history. You see?
Yeah, Horn does a lot of that, by the way, too. But real quick, I don't want to, because I haven't gotten to read that chapter carefully enough, and I want to use that as an excuse to bring you back another time. And because I have to leave, I have sort of a definitive end here at 1 o'clock. There is something that Horn mentions in here that I did want to ask you about today, because it's relevant to one of your current contemporary projects. And as I said, in the middle of all of these arguments that you all were having, and admittedly, again, my bias reading, so I read this, and I like the way you put it, and you're in describing why George was right to be critical of your disagreement with Huey. There's this discussion, at least part of the discussion, of many of the arguments that were being held where Eldridge Cleaver was involved. One in particular that involved also Kwame Ture or Stokely Carmichael. And so I just want to read this one quick part, and then you'll see where it's specific to your. So on page 343, Horn writes, because he's talking about some of the disagreement over fascism, some of what it seems relevant seems similar to today. With their articulation of fascism, in quotes, one might think that the BPP might seek, as in the 1930s, to forge a broad front against this pestilence. Instead, a frothing Cleaver in August 1969 penned an open letter to Stokely Carmichael, terming him derisively, quote, with the exception of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, the most dogmatic force on the scene today, end quote, given his, quote, nebulous enunciation of Black power. That is, Cleaver is critical of how Stokely Carmichael is defining Black power. Cleaver, that is, looked back in anger at the Howard alumnus's castigation of the BPP hookup with the Peace and Freedom Party in February 1968. Doubling down in his assault on Carmichael, Cleaver insisted, quote, that, quote, we are a Marxist-Leninist party, end quote, unlike other formations with which the former SNCC leader was associated. Now I'm ending my quote of Horn. In other words, if I'm reading this correctly, Cleaver is critical of Stokely Carmichael for arguing in favor of something similar to what it sounds like you're arguing for to take place today, that is the building of this broad united front. If I'm reading that all correctly, and if I'm getting this all right, does any of that ring a bell for you? And do you see that parallel that I'm trying to draw to the work you're trying to do today?
Oh, ding dong, the bell is wrong. Listen, okay, this is something a lot of people might not fully appreciate. First of all, Kwame Ture and Imam Jamil Al-Amin, who's now a political prisoner.
That's right.
And has been a political prisoner for, I think, over 25, 30 years, became what we call, they were literally drafted into the Black Panther Party. But this was at a critical point when SNCC was abandoned by so-called left and Jewish and white support when they declared Black power. This was the major contradiction. Now, I know there's other people in SNCC like Mae Jackson and other folks that you should probably have on to talk about that. okay, and throw some more light on what I'm about to say. But from what I understood, and I knew Kwame Ture, and I was privy to be with him the night before he went to Cuba. And he explained the problem that he had with the Central Committee. And I have no reason in retrospect to think that what he said was inaccurate. And if you remember, and many people don't know it, but a snitch jacket was put on Kwame Ture when he went to Cuba.
Yeah, Horn talks about that, and how people said that him and into South Africa too. They said that Mary Makeba was a snitch too. That they were both working for the CIA.
Everybody was a snitch. Everybody was a snitch except David Hilliard and his crew.
And if I could just interject, I was on a bus in the middle of Zimbabwe one night with a group of black folks from this country, where this brother preacher from Chicago started going into a whole lecture about how that was all true about Ture, and I foolishly in my youth interrupted.
What preacher was this?
I'll remember his name and I'll find it. We'll talk later. But all I remember off the top is that he was from Chicago and claimed to have been working with Dr. King at one point. And he got up and gave this whole thing, and I was like, I had to interrupt the whole thing. It was like, my man, you can't talk this reckless. I'm sorry, but anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
I know we got limited time. Let me say this. When Kwame was talking about the contradiction that he had with members of the Black Panther Party Central Committee, right? One of these individuals, I think if I'm not mistaken, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, there's a time sequence here. I think that Kwame Ture left the country before Eldridge went into exile.
I'm
almost certain of that, because they had to put a snitch jacket on Kwame Ture when he went to Cuba, and the Cubans, of course, Kwame Ture wasn't all of that tight with the Central Committee in Cuba because of that snitch jacket thing that was put on him. But at the same time, he identified with the black Cubans who were seemingly, in his eyes, oppressed and marginalized in the Cuban Revolution, which of course is an anathema to any country that's providing a shelter for you to talk about their domestic contradictions like that. Okay, but anyway, what Kwame said was that they had a disagreement over this ideological proposition. Now get this clear. This is a simple ideological proposition. Kwame Ture said that all black people, all Negroes are potential revolutionaries. In other words, he meant that any person that was suffering from Negroitis, that was suffering from a misconception or a misunderstanding of white supremacy, and that's why they were a self-hating Negro, that they could be organized out of that they could be raised from the dead, so to speak. The Black Panther, David Hilliard and Bobby and them didn't hold it, didn't believe that. They said that all Negroes were potential traitors. That was their position. All Negroes were potential traitors. Kwame Ture's position was that all Negroes were potential revolutionaries. And they disagreed with that. And they had such a vehement disagreement that on one occasion, what's her name? I forgot who it was. I think it might have been I forgot who it was. Slapped Kwame Ture physically. You see, and had to be restrained by others in the room. There came a physical confrontation over this. That's when Kwame felt that it was no longer possible for him to function in that type of environment with these comrades. And he came to the East Coast, and the reason why he came and told us this, because we have a history on the East Coast with people in the Pan-African movement. You see what I'm saying? And Kwame Ture was always a Pan-African. You see, and we had a history with that. In fact, Lumumba Shakur, who was the leading a named defendant in the Panther 21 case, you know, had a consistent relationship with SNCC in New York, because New York became the headquarters for SNCC after it broke up, and it became the student national organizing committee. The student national coordinating committee, as to, and the word nonviolent was dropped. Okay, so there were a number of communists in SNCC in New York, you understand, who had the same position that had the same position about race and the role of Jews and Zionists on the left. Because back then, people don't understand this. Back then, the left used to agree with us on everything except Israel. The minute Israel came up, they went south on us.
Some things seem familiar. Some as you say, history rhymes. Don't repeat, but it's sometimes
exactly.
rhymes.
So I want people to understand that Cleaver's vituperative denunciation of Kwame Ture was based essentially on the premise that Kwame Ture always wanted to focus on Black people and felt that Black people could be redeemed. Okay, and Eldridge, on the other hand, felt that that white folks can be used, and look at how this played this out. And y'all can look at this for yourselves and come to your own conclusions. When we called for a national anti-fascist united front in 1969, when we called for this, 7,000 white activists showed up, white leftists from SDS to all of these different support groups, Peace and Freedom, Peace, and all of these groups came to support the Black call for a united front against fascism. So how is it that the Black Panther Party, when the United States had yet to consolidate its right-wing fascism until right-wing fascism became what they call now the alt-right, and what they call now, it hadn't consolidated itself yet. SWAT was even a brand new word in the lexicon of law enforcement then, okay? So how is it that white radicals, all these white radicals came to the Black Panther call for a united front, and the blacker than black revolutionary nationalists didn't? They didn't come. They didn't come. The ones that were critical of Cleaver running on a Peace and Freedom Party ticket is reflective today in many respects of the same contradictions that people are having while we're calling for this National United Front. And it's coming from so-called black nationalists. It's coming from so-called people that's putting black first. We ain't talking about the black capitalists, because we know how they feel about that.
So wait, so just so I'm clear, just so I'm keeping up, in this instance at least, you're arguing that Ture or Carmichael in that moment was incorrect, and that Cleaver was correct, and that you're seeing that pattern play out again today in a refusal among some blacker than black folks being unwilling to unite on certain political purposes, for instance, against fascism today. Am I following you correctly?
Sort of. What I'm trying to say is Cleaver was reacting to, we have Kwame Ture reacting to the removal of support, you know, from that moment that they crossed the Pettus Bridge or whenever, and the black fist went up and said Black Power. You know, white folks left. I mean, they left like they was on a cruise ship. You see, they bounced, right? It was no longer that support. So the civil rights nonviolent leaders, the SCLC and all of them, you know, that withdrawal of support began to affected them. You see, but at the same time that these whites left the the black student movement and what they perceived as a trend towards black radicalism, the white left fell in behind black revolutionary radicals. And 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 the cultural nationalists, you know, the bulletproof dashiki wearing cultural nationals like Mama Lama and the House of Kawaida and all of them, you see, and they they viewed that support of white folks as us being just, you know, supportive of white folks. And I mean, you had all kinds of stuff history. Yeah, white people in the Black Panther Party. You've seen this stuff. We have white people in the Black Panther Party and you know, and all of this, you see. And even people that are revered today as Afrocentric Pan-Africanists used to repeat that when they were students. I'll tell you, being 80 years old has some advantages. I remember a lot of shit them motherfuckers said. You see? And so when Eldridge is critical of Kwame Ture, he's critical of the idea that Negroes are potential revolutionaries. You see? And in fact, they're not, in his eyes, they're potential traitors. Okay. And that a coalition with white mother country radicals is a strategic and a tactical coalition of value, because none of our aspirations as Black people, whether it's self-determination, whether it's reparations, whatever it is going to be realized unless there's a revolution in the what we used to call the mother country, unless there is a revolutionary movement in the United States to overthrow the duopoly system and capitalism. A lot of people will talk about reparations is the way to go. And if you don't support reparations, you ain't Black or you ain't revolutionary and all of this. If we look at the history of reparations have never been awarded to a people that had lost the war. The reparations was always paid by the people who lost the war. In fact, sadly to say though, white folks won this war so far. The white supremacist construct of America is on top right now. They're $28 trillion in debt, and they ain't about to give a Black person a dime because of their white supremacist history. Now, we may get people that come up and they get grants here and some money is put into a program here. That's not what we're talking about. How is it that the European settler state of Israel, clearly a European settler state, clearly an anti-Semitic entity, because the Palestinian people are Semitic and the Zionists from Europe are not. Huh? And they're seeking the displacement of Semitic people from their own land. And so we can go all the way back to the Balfour Agreement. We can go all the way back to the League of Nations mandate that gave Britain all this. This was all part of Britain's empire strategies and their epoch. Okay, but the kernel of this story, to me at least, is that any true Pan-African and any anti-colonial armed struggle that was not endorsed or was not supported by the white left in Europe would fall into the category of being seen as of trying to ameliorate or recruit white people into your movement. And that's how the Black nationalists saw Cleveland. But this was mainly, and I mean, this applied to us too, you know, on a lesser level, because most of the Black members of the Black Panther Party on the East Coast had African names. So did the us people on the West Coast who were killing Panthers have African names. So David, you know, they got it twisted. You know, they thought that because we had African names that we was like these pork chop nationalists in California. We wasn't like that. And they got a wake-up call on this split when they came to Harlem. Because I grew up in the South, but I want to hear that shit. You see? David was a country Negro. Came from Chitlin Switch, Louisiana, some goddamn where. You see? And so there was all of these differences that I'm just trying to point out. You know, that Eldridge saying what he said came from the perspective that all Negroes were potential traitors. And that it was, and us being Marxists and us being dialectical materialists and historical, we understand the value of coalitions and united fronts. There's been, I mean, the Kuomintang was united with Mao's Communist Party when the Japanese invaded China. Soon as the Japanese was rocked, Mao said, all right, let's get it on. Ran them knuckleheads to Formosa that we call Taiwan today. Coalitions have always been valuable in the fight against fascism, in the fight against imperialism. Okay. And you know, Cleaver saw that, but he saw that with the wrong ideological lenses. That's what I'm trying to point out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You see, and that was misinterpreted by folks who supported our thrust for Black power. That was supported by them because say, there you go, you bring them white folks in, and now you down with them. You see, Eldridge and the Central Committee made it clear that the reason why there was an alliance with the Peace and Freedom Party is because they had the wherewithal to carry it, to allow the Black Panthers' voice to be heard around the country in the campaign for president. And this is much like the contradiction we're seeing now in certain respects, although there's a lot of differences between Cornel West and the Green Party and stuff now. You know, this is starting to get out of control. You know, Cornel is calling Jill a racist, and Jill is calling Cornel.
I'm saying everybody, as soon as they get in front of some mic or a reporter, we go nuts. Everybody losing their mind, man. It's like,
you know, and then too, you know, this the subjective factor. You know, there's a subjective factor. You know, Cornel, I will say that Cornel should be more specific when he makes certain allegations. He should be. But I understand what he means. I understand what he could be feeling, because the Green Party don't have any legs in the Black community. There's no president.
No, I get that. But the point would be, what are the politics that the Green Party represent that you could bring, or he could bring, to the Black community? Because, by the way, and I've reached out to him, he might be coming around here next month or something, but because meanwhile he's running around with the ADOS crew. He's running around with 19 Keys and doing, you know, high level consciousness discussions about, you know, I mean, he's so the legs he's building within the Black community are not based on any real meaningful politics. They're based on Black capitalist politics as far as those crews are concerned. So I hear what you're saying. I wish, myself included, we all do better, man. That's it. And by the way, real quick, I checked, I doubled, and I got, and I think he's right, that the Reverend I was talking about on that bus in Zimbabwe was Reverend Al Sampson out of Chicago. I don't know if that name rings a bell, but and his exact line was, he said, Touré ran, as he said, as soon as things got hot in this country, Touré ran to South Africa and hid under Miriam Makeba's skirt. That's the line I remember him saying. And I said, my man, I was like, sir, come on.
Apparently he was locked into somebody else's a framework of reference, because you know, I don't see that as being the case anyway. I just explained to you why Kwame went to Cuba and how Cuba viewed him with suspicion, and he couldn't stay there, so he went to North Africa, and that's where in fact, he went to a cultural festival in North Africa and he never left. And being a genuine Pan-African, you know, his grave is in Guinea. You know, he started a party in Guinea under Sekou Touré. You know, that's why his name partly Torah.
That's
You
right.
know, so he was more consistent than that pork chop preacher that you know, that talked about it. But you know, I know you got to go, but I just wanted to say that things weren't all of that cut and dry. In
Right.
that sense, there were subjective factors. There was factors in terms of the leadership of the Central Committee. You know, I mean, there was urban rural factors, because when I first went to California and they told me this was the ghetto, I thought this was a suburb. I said, this is the ghetto? I come from the South Bronx, man. It joint looked like my spot looked like Berlin after World War II. You understand? So when
It does look. It is a little funny when you sleep because it got little lawns and nice
I'm trying
little
to tell you,
houses.
brothers is out there smoking the blunt, watering the lawn. You know, I said, damn, this is the ghetto. and that translated into everything, man. Because I remember distinctly how when the split went, before the split, when we were busted and they sent 2 representatives from the Central Committee to run the New York chapter, how country they were. These dudes were straight up country, you know, and it was unbelievable to me. We had them wearing gangster hats. You understand? Leather, you know. This is the most esoteric part of all of this. You see what I'm saying? Because every time I used to go out to the West Coast, David Hilliard would say, "Man, you got to bring some of them skimmers that you got back here for us." And I would have to buy a whole bunch of gangster fedoras and stuff. And if you look, and to show you what I'm saying is true, if you look at the speech that Huey Newton gave at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, Robert Webb, who was murdered by members of the West Coast Party, Robert Webb is sitting up there with a gangster hat on. You understand? And looking like Brother Dead Tree, you know, Tombstone, wow. Brother Tombstone, you know, straight, hard face. And he got a gangster skimmer on that I bought for them Negroes on the West Coast. You see? So what I'm trying to say is the perception of struggle on the West Coast did not have them strong, deep African roots in struggle. Garvey came out of Harlem. Noble Drew Ali. All these folks came out of Harlem. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying? Malcolm X used to give speeches on the same corner down the street from where the Black Panther Party office was from. And this is indicative of how the West Coast saw Black folks who believed in Black folks. You see, because when I was arrested and held in the Tombs on downtown New York, the lawyers arranged, Bob Lefcourt and Bill Kunstler and them arranged for David Hilliard to come in and see me. And David Hilliard came in and said, "Look, we're going to close the chapter, the New York chapter of the Black Panther Party." I said, "David, you can't do that." He said, "Well, there's too many informers. Y'all are all in prison. We don't know who the informers are." I said, "David, this is the capital of Black America. This is where the Black Renaissance popped off. This is where the birth of the jazz came from. This is what the home of urban blues." Just like Amiri Baraka said, we are blues people, you know. And this is our home, cultural. This is our cultural and political and ideological home. The party can't just up and leave. He said, "Well, okay, I'll think about it." And he was with Bobby Seale, and they went up to New Haven, Connecticut, because it was passing through New York, because Bobby had a speaking engagement at Yale. Okay, when Bobby got up to New Haven. There was an informer there who had kidnapped one of the Panthers helpers, one of the community helpers, Alex Rackley. And he kidnapped him and brought him up to New Haven, tortured him. And Alex Rackley was differently able. He was autistic, semi-autistic. But we used to love him because he used to always make himself useful around the office. He would sweep the office and keep it clean and wash the windows and everything because he loved us and we liked him. And this piece of I forgot his name, but you can get his name. It's in the book.
It's not Sam's, right? Is that Sam's?
George Sams.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. And he came and took Alex up to, because Alex actually, when we got busted, he went into a disconnect because we were really close. He was talking about how they all, I know who the snitches are around here. They put our brothers in prison, so and so, and he was going off. So when George Sams came through, and he was sent through by Central Committee, they were sending him all around the country to correct so-called misconceptions and disorganization. So he was sent to all of these chapters and caused chaos. And he took George Sams to New Haven, tortured him in the basement of the party headquarters there. So when Bobby got there, he don't know nothing about this. So when Bobby gets there to speak at Yale, Sams has Bobby come down to the basement, and Bobby sees Sams in this tortured condition, and he basically says, "Yo, I ain't got, do what you got to do," and left. And he got indicted for that. He got indicted because they wanted to get Bobby, and they wanted to eliminate him. So they made him an accessory to a murder. He didn't know anything about that. He didn't have nothing to do with that. It was Sams that lured him down to that basement. If he never went down to that basement, if he never saw Alex Rackley and just went to do his speaking engagement and left, he probably would have never got indicted. But because he did become indicted, then to the Central Committee on the West Coast and Hilliard and them, it became essential to keep the Black Panther Party open in New York, because the Panther 21 were a money-making machine. We had enormous amount of support. I mean, some of the people that were in the city council was on the Panther 21 Defense Committee. Eleanor Holmes Norton, other people, Adam Clayton Powell's successor. All of these people was on our defense committee. So we were raising money and support. And they felt that without that type of money and support on the East Coast, that the chairman of the party would have had suffered, would have been convicted. So that money was used, that support was translated to New Haven, and by the grace of Allah, Bobby never was convicted there. So I just want to tell that small story, that it ain't all what you think it is, this history. You see? It's the subjective factor, it's the political factor, and it's the historical moment. Like I said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And we're in a similar historical moment now. And that's why I decided on my own, and with others, yourself included, decided to call for a united front against fascism. And hopefully we won't repeat these mistakes. Hopefully we'll be on a whole different level now, because now white supremacy has consolidated itself behind the duopoly political parties in uncertain terms. We know that Project 2025, what it means. We know what the implications are. And both parties are on board for Project 2025. Both of them, not just the Republicans. Both of these parties are, okay? And so when I call for this united front, you notice I didn't call on Jill Stein and the Green Party to drop their campaign. I didn't call on Claudia de la Cruz to give up her campaign. I didn't call on Cornell to stop his campaign. Whatever differences they had, I didn't even deal with that. I wanted them to endorse the concept of a united front and fit in where they could get in this process. You know, if Jill Stein and the Green Party is on the ballot in 31 states, then they should put as part of their platform in these local constituencies, community control of public safety, so that people could actually vote for community control of public safety, so that they could actually vote against the murderers that killed Massey, that they could actually vote against the murderers that have killed our people over the last several years. Okay, and Cornell, he does have a relationship in the Black community. People do know him. People do know, and therefore, run Cornell, run. You see, because he endorses community control of public safety too. You see, same with Claudia. You see, So it's the issues that I'm talking about that the United Front has to stand for. It's not the subjugation of one organization's agenda or a particular niche of struggle. That we all have something on this side of the barricades that could benefit from a united effort. And maybe this United Front, if we build it strong enough, if we build it on a national level, we could endure these next 4 years and come up with our own political party, come up with our own working class, black, my immigrant led, whatever political party, you see? But we have to begin somewhere. And that's why I call for an anti-fascist United Front.
Dhoruba, as usual, well, always, we certainly appreciate all of that and everything that you represent and remind us of, and certainly appreciate your analysis. I do want to, I feel like, so just listening to you again, say what you were just saying, and just to redraw some parallels here, if more of us engage what Horn has written here, and learn more about previous arguments in various elements of the left around armed struggle and other alternatives, then we would at least be at minimum, because, so we're clearly not at the level of advocating or engaging in armed struggle. At least we could, as I think Horn also points us to in this book, and you certainly are, other more militant forms of engagement with above board legal mechanisms. For instance, building a united front against fascism, building militant, more radical forms of electoral engagement with electoral politics, and so on and so forth. And even unionization, which becomes a feature in the epilogue here, at least briefly. I don't know to what extent it's built upon previously in the book, but where of labor unions and being reminded of where all of us are in relationship to the class structure and the working class within, as Horn I think appropriately points out, a settler colonial apparatus. So anyway, I really appreciate you coming through again and having this discussion. I appreciate what Horn has offered up here. Again, is another opportunity to have these kinds of conversations, to have you come back and talk more about it, because I'm going to continue to read the book. As you and others may have a chance to read the book, we can have more conversations around the book and build from there. But Dhoruba, thank you very much once again, man. It's always a pleasure, and stay safe, and look forward to the next time, my man. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I hope it's beneficial, because we can build those a synthesis of the type of research and acumen that Brother Gerald Horn brought, and also the information and struggles and records of what actually happened in other parts of the country in relationship to armed struggle. So yeah, thank you, Jared.
No, right on. Thank you, Dhoruba. Take good care. We'll catch up with you soon as possible, my man. Peace. All right, everybody. Big thanks to Baba Dhoruba and all. That was fantastic. And wherever we are with everything, shout out and thanks to Gerald Horn. I appreciate the work that he's provided here and giving us a chance to review. Thanks to everybody who was able here to join us for this live. Sorry we didn't get to have more of a back and forth. There was a little bit of a time constraint. That's my bad. Sorry about that. But please like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon. We are off our demonetized status tomorrow. So let that hopefully inspire some things. We have some, by the way, as it relates to revenue being raised on the platform, we have some exciting projects and announcements, hopefully forthcoming in the not too distant future. So again, a lot happening. Please continue to support. Appreciate everybody. Peace only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. And I will catch you next time here at
I mix what I like.
What do you sacrifice? Calm. kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago for which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, they set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy and defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.